Okay, so what if I told you that there's a single family of chemicals that holds the power to cure deadly diseases, acts as a vital hormone inside our own bodies, and can poke holes in the very ozone layer that protects us? Sounds wild, right? Well, let's dive into the fascinating and pretty contradictory world of halocarbons. I mean, just look at this. On one side, you've got a clear hero, a compound called chloramphenicol. It's a lifesaver, a powerful antibiotic that tackles things like typhoid fever. But then on the other side, a villain, freons. You know, the stuff that used to be in old fridges and spree cans, notorious for tearing up our planet's ozone layer. The crazy part? They're from the same chemical family.
So that's the big question, isn't it? How is it even possible for one chemical family to be responsible for such totally opposite outcomes? That's the mystery we're going to unravel. And the answer, you'll see, is buried deep inside their chemical structure.
All right, let's start by getting to know this family a little better. The heroes, the villains, and just how wide-ranging their effects really are. And this isn't some small, distant family. No, this is a huge dynasty. It includes thyroxine. That's a hormone your own body makes using iodine to function properly. It's halothane, a critical anesthetic that makes surgery possible. It's the infamous insecticide, DDT. And of course, those freons, they're literally inside of us and all around us. They are everywhere. So what's the one simple rule that ties all these incredibly different molecules together? Let's break it down and get to the core of what makes a halocarbon, well, a halocarbon. You know, it's actually way simpler than you might think. You start with a basic hydrocarbon, just a simple molecule of carbon and hydrogen. Then you just swap out one or more of those hydrogens for a halogen atom. And that's your fluorine, chlorine, bromine, or iodine. That's it. That one tiny swap is the secret recipe that creates this entire powerful class of compounds.
Now, they basically come in two main flavors, and it all depends on where that halogen decides to attach. In haloalkanes, the halogen bonds to a carbon in a simple, flexible chain. Chemists call that an sp3 carbon. But in haloarenes, it attaches to a carbon that's locked into a super stable, rigid ring structure, an sp2 carbon. It sounds like a small detail, but believe me, that difference in the bond type is a huge deal.
And this brings us right to one of the most important ideas in all of chemistry. Shape dictates destiny. The 3D geometry of a molecule, what it's made of, that's what gives it its personality, how it acts, who it interacts with, and ultimately whether it's helpful or harmful. Take a look at this chart. It shows such a clear pattern. As you go down the list and swap in a bigger halogen, from the smaller fluorine to chlorine to bromine, the boiling point just keeps climbing. Why? Well, bigger, heavier atoms create stronger forces between molecules, making them stickier, so it takes a lot more energy, more heat, to get them to break apart and turn into a gas. It's a perfect example of how one tiny change has a direct, predictable effect. And it's not just about which atoms are in the molecule, it's about where they're placed. Like the slide says, if you take a ring with two halogens on it, the version that's perfectly symmetrical, the para-isomer, has a way higher melting point. That symmetry lets the molecules pack together super tightly, like perfectly stacked bricks. And that tight packing makes them much harder to melt. Okay, this is where things get really cool. Go on, look at your hands. They're mirror images of each other, right? But you can't lay them flat on top of one another and have them match up perfectly. Well, some molecules are exactly the same way. This property is called chirality, or handedness, and it has absolutely massive consequences in biology. This entire field of study kicked off way back in 1848 with the great Louis Pasteur. He was the one who first noticed that crystals of the same exact compound could exist as these perfect mirror images. He figured it had to be because of the 3D arrangement of the atoms themselves. He was laying the foundation for understanding why a left-handed drug could be a cure, while its right-handed twin might do nothing at all, or worse. So we've seen their shape, now let's see how they act. The most important reaction for these halocarbons is basically a big chemical swap meet. One group gets kicked out and a new one takes its place. The technical name for it is nucleophilic substitution. And this swap can happen in two main ways. There's a direct one-step process called SN2, and then there's a more patient two-step process called SN1. Which path the reaction takes depends completely on the shape of the halocarbon we start with. The SN2 reaction is like a direct sneak attack. The new group comes in and hits the carbon from the exact opposite side of the halogen it's trying to kick out. In one smooth move, the old halogen leaves as the new one attaches, and this forces the whole molecule to flip its shape. The analogy's perfect. It's just like an umbrella turning inside out in a strong gust of wind. It's an elegant, single-step dance.
The SN1 reaction is a bit more patient. First, the halogen just leaves, all by itself. This creates a flat, positively charged middleman called a carbocation. And because this intermediate is flat, the new group can now come in and attack from either the top or the bottom. It has a choice, which means you can end up with a mix of different products.
So what makes a reaction choose one path over the other? Well, it's basically a competition. If the carbon atom is really crowded with bulky groups, it's tough for the new group to get in there for that direct SN2 attack. It's like trying to park a huge truck in a tiny garage. So it prefers the SN1 path, where it can wait for the garage door to open first. Simpler, less crowded molecules, they prefer the direct SN2 route. See? Structure dictates reactivity.
Okay, let's bring it all home. Let's connect all of this chemistry back to that first big question. How can this one family of chemicals be both a hero and a villain? The answer is in the reactions we just talked about.
Here it is, laid out plain and simple. Remember those two blueprints? In haloalkanes, where the halogen is on a simple chain, that carbon-halogen bond is kind of long and weak. It's easy to break. That makes them really reactive, which is fantastic for chemists who want to use them as building blocks for new things, like medicines. But in haloarenes, where the halogen is on that super stable ring, that bond is shorter, stronger, and way less likely to break. It's extremely unreactive.
And that unreactivity, that's the double-edged sword. This quote hits the nail on the head. Because compounds like DDT are so stable and unreactive, they just don't break down. Soil bacteria can't eat them. They just stay. They persist in the environment for years, for decades, building up in the food chain. Their greatest strength, their stability, is also their greatest curse.
So let's wrap this up. What's the bottom line? It all starts with that simple recipe. Take a hydrocarbon, swap in a halogen. From there, everything else falls into place. The molecule's 3D shape and its specific bond type literally determine its entire personality. And that personality can make it either a reactive, life-saving tool or an unreactive, persistent pollutant. By understanding this fundamental chemistry, we gain the power to control their fate, and in turn, our own.
Which leaves us with one last massive question for the future. We've become masters at creating these incredibly powerful molecules. We know how they work. The next great challenge for chemists is this. How do we design the next generation of these compounds to be just as effective, to have all of the heroic benefits, but with none of the haunting environmental legacy? That's the puzzle we now have to solve.